Hello and welcome to Double Byte Gaming's Unity 3D educational series, Becoming a Unity 3D Badass. So we're going to take you through basics all the way up to some more advanced concepts in this series. We're going to show you the process of just creating a project and then learning how to utilize the tools in the editor. Really, from a starter standpoint, no experience, all the way up to doing some programming, and give you a good base that you can use to start going off and learning things on your own. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get Unity 3D opened up here, go to the New tab, the New button that was up there. We're going to name our project, and then we're going to choose a location for it. Got a folder set up already there. We'll select that folder. It gives you a couple of options here. You've got your 3D and 2D. We'll get into some of the 2D stuff later on, but really it doesn't make a difference. It just changes a few basic configuration options in the Unity 3D. If you're going to make a 2D game, a totally 2D game using the new Unity 2D setup, then you're going to want to select 2D by default. If you're doing a full 3D game, that one, it just helps because you don't have to do as much configuration on images you bring in and that type of thing, which gets them ready faster and saves you a step. You can do all the same stuff by selecting a 3D package. I usually just start with a 3D package because I'm comfortable with the tools, and editing assets and things doesn't really bother me. You can choose some default packages. We're not going to worry about that right now. And that all looks good, so we're going to say create project. Alright, so we're greeted by a few different things here. Standard file menu up here. Some tools. These are tools that are these are buttons that correlate with tools for manipulating objects in your world. This is some more advanced features that are attached to these things. This is your hierarchy, which shows all the objects in the world and how they're related to one another. We'll go into that in more detail pretty soon here. We've got the scene view, which is the view that you'll do editing of your actual world in. The game view is where you can actually see what your camera, which we have right here, is able to currently see, which is nothing, because there's nothing in the world that's being rendered currently. The animator panel that shows by default is for using Unity's built-in animation systems. We have the inspector over here. The inspector is going to let you see what is actually attached to the objects that you're manipulating in your world here. So we have a couple of objects here. We have a camera and we have a directional light, and the main camera here has a transform component, a camera component, a few other components, this GUI layer, which we'll probably won't worry about too much for now, flare layer, once again not terribly important right now, and an audio listener, which is a part of the audio system. Components we'll go into more detail on later, but each component that you will attach to game objects and others that you will create later will all have their own individual functionalities that automatically get added to the game object and allows them to do cool stuff. Directional light, for example, has a light component on it, and transform is a standard component that you're going to see on every game object. Let's see. So we have the console here. Console is going to be where you're able to see output from the running application. You'll be able to add statements in your code that will dump output here that'll help you either track what's happening internally or debug things or log events for later, all sorts of stuff. The project view is where you get to see everything that's actually a part of the project you've created. That'll fill up as you start creating things. Start adding more and more content to your games, and that's pretty much the basics. So the next thing I really wanted to go over was camera controls, and that's in the scene view. Camera controls are pretty critical to get down, so that you're able to easily and fluidly move around in your scene and be able to really efficiently edit objects in the scene, especially if you're doing like level design or something like that. You're going to want to be really comfortable with this process. So, excuse me, I'm getting over a bit of a cold here. So first and foremost, as far as camera controls, you can click any object in the world. These are icons representing objects that don't have like a mesh, which is a 3D object attached. But you can click icons, you can click on 3D objects, and that allows you to select. You can drag select as well. That'll allow you to select a whole collection of objects at the same time. So once you've selected an object, the first thing I'd like to show you is that you can hit the F key, and that will automatically focus the camera directly on whichever object you've had selected. And at that point, if we hold down Alt and left drag, so Alt on this is on the PC, I'm not sure what it is on the Mac, I'd have to, I don't use the Mac very often. We would hold down Alt and left drag to rotate the camera around our focal point. That's going to let us control where we are in an orbit around the object that's currently selected. Mouse wheel allows you to zoom in and out, which is helpful for letting you get a closer, far view on whatever it is you're working on. Middle click and drag allows you to pan. So panning is like up, down, left, right, that type of business. Right click, drag lets you kind of get an FPS style. In fact, it's very FPS style camera view. Because so long as you have that right button clicked down, you can push down W, A, S, or D, and that's going to let you do more panning and zooming with W and S. A and D is pan left and right, and Q and E are pan up and down. And then when you combine that with being able to rotate around like this, you pretty much have an FPS camera that's pretty easy to get around your scene with, pretty much any way that you'd like. While doing that, using W, A, S, and D with that right-click drag camera movement mode, you can hold down Shift as well, which will actually, I'm going to come back a ways here, which will actually control the speed of the camera and make it much faster. So if you need to get from point A to point B in the scene much quicker, you can do this. Alright, so let's see here. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to look at the creation of objects, which you can do through the Game Object menu here. You can create game objects. We're going to look at creating a few things. Let's go ahead and create... You do a cube. Oops, we already did a cube. Let's only do one of those. No, not the name. Let's delete that. We've got spheres. We've got... let's do a cylinder. So we've created a few objects. 3 different objects right now. The sphere is hidden nicely inside the cube. But we don't want them lined up on top of each other. Now, as pointed out before, we can click to select objects. That also means click to deselect objects. So let's move. I want to get the cylinder out of here. So we're going to grab that cylinder. We're going to grab these handles on here, and that's going to allow us to move objects around the scene. The red handle, which stopped being red as soon as I grabbed it, the red handle corresponds to the x-axis. You can see those actually line up. These and this lined up in generally the same direction. The blue axis corresponds to the z. Blue corresponds to the z-axis, and this green / yellow green, yeah, it's green. The green one corresponds to the y-axis, y being up and down, z being like forward and back, and red being like left, x being left and right. So it's a little bit of a primer on coordinate systems there. So that's going to let you move things around. You can just play around with it a bit. You can move things around in pretty much any axis, in any axis you want. So we're going to get that out of the way like that. And then I say, I don't want the cube here either. So we're going to grab that and just move it over to the right. There. Now you can see all 3 objects that we've created, except for the cylinder that's all out of line like that. OCD kicking in there for a minute. Line it up. Alright. So we figured out that we can move things around. Now that is actually also accessible via the W key. If you hit W, we're already in it, so you can't see it change. But if you hit W, you're going to automatically go into this this tool right here, which is the movement control for selected objects. Now, if we hit E, we're going to move into this tool, which is a rotation tool, and then we can actually rotate our objects around any of the axes. Like right now, you can see that's a blue circle. That means we're going to rotate around the x-axis, which is pretty great. Or I'm sorry, around the z-axis. I almost just left that hanging there and confused everybody. And you can grab anywhere on the circle and just drag arbitrarily to rotate things as well. I don't usually like that. I like being a little more precise with it. But that's how you can rotate objects. Next, we can hit R. We can hit R, and we're able to go into scale, the scale tool. So once again, blue corresponds to scaling along Z, red corresponds to scaling along X, and green or yellow, it's green. I keep saying yellow for some reason. And green corresponds to scaling along the y-axis locally to the object, because you can see when we rotated it, this thing actually rotated with it. And now we've got is, you know, the red axis here pointing off in a different direction than the world one. This compass one up here, all the other ones have gone and done the same thing. So as you can see, there's, you know, these tools are trying to represent the local orientation of the object, and there's a couple of things we can do to adjust that. Now this is all spun all weirdly. Now if I still wanted to move this flat forward or straight up and down, that's going to be kind of difficult. I'm going to have to grab this thing and kind of like eyeball it up. So what we can do is we can come up here to these advanced tools that I mentioned earlier, and we can select local, and we can turn that into a globally based tool. Regardless of which tool it is you're using, it'll go between local and global. So if we wanted to move that thing flat, even though it's rotated all oddly, we can make sure that's in global, and then we're able to move it. These handles will always be lined up the same as the compass at that point. Is a good way to remember. Z always points the same direction, X, Y, same deal. So that's helpful if you're trying to manipulate objects that you've had to rotate in odd directions, because at that point it's a lot easier to work with them in global space. I say global space like that because in 3D we have coordinate spaces. Every object has its own coordinate space, which you can see here because these things are rotated oddly. These are the same axis in a way of thinking about it as these, just rotated, just like it's been rotated in its own local frame, they say. So let's see here. We've gone over creating some objects. You can delete objects by selecting them either in the scene view or in your hierarchy, either way, and hitting delete. So we can delete some objects by doing that, clean up the scene there a bit. Something else we can look at is duplicating objects. So if I have the cube selected and I hold down Control D, that's going to duplicate the objects for us. As you just saw there, you can actually drag these things around in the scene to position them. And the reason I was going to bring that up is because we can actually nest objects one under the other. So we now have two cubes here. They're in the same position because one was duplicated from the other. Now if we wanted to move this around, we can. But it is a child. You can see that it's underneath this cube. This cube is a child of this one. And what that means is, we want on pivot. There's another advanced tool I'm going to have to explain at some point, but you can see the pivot center pretty much finds the center of all the objects you have selected, and pivot sticks to the center of the single object you have selected. So even, you know, when you go to pivot, it's going to take this object and any others that are underneath it and find the middle between all of them, and that's where all your tools are going to show up and where you're going to rotate around and move from and all that. But for now we're going to leave it on pivot, and we are going to rotate just this cube, which you can see is this one here. And then you're going to see that even though we're not rotating this cube, it is going to rotate with it. It is going to stay, it's going to keep its offset and its rotation, everything relative to this one, but it's going to rotate around it. And there you can see that right there. It's going to stay relative, it's going to keep the same relative position and orientation, but it is going to move with it. You have objects nested within other objects, and the parent objects control, in a way, they control the orientation and position of child objects. So if a parent object moves, children move with it. If a parent object rotates or scales, they do the same. It's always relative at that point. That's going to conclude this installment of Becoming a Unity 3D Badass from Double Byte Gaming. Please like and subscribe. We appreciate that infinitely. Watch our other videos and let us know what you think. Thank you very much. You guys have a great day.